Grayson Adler never saw the moment his life became convenient to others, only the long, quiet stretch of years that followed it. After his father passed away in his second year of college, he became the person his family reached out to, not for comfort, but for coverage. When the air conditioner broke down in the middle of July, his mother didn't call to ask how he was holding up in the city. She called to ask for his card number. When his younger sister lost her scholarship due to poor grades, it wasn't her own voice on the line. It was his brother's asking how soon Grayson could wire the tuition. The words "thank you" were always implied but never spoken. It was as if helping was simply his role, expected like the sun rising inevitable, like silence at dinner. He lived in Boston, working quietly as a software engineer for a firm that prized his attention to detail but never remembered his birthday. And somehow that still felt more like family than the one he was born into. Years went by in a rhythm he didn't realize he was following. Payday phone call, transaction, silence. Over time, the calls from his family had become predictable, each one arriving only when something broke. Someone failed or someone needed saving. Grayson gave and gave and gave. Not because he didn't know he was being used, but because some part of him still wanted to believe he belonged. The message came on a Tuesday. It wasn't a call. It wasn't even a personal text. It was a group message sent at 9:03 a.m. that read, "Mom passed service this Saturday 10 a.m. Come if you can." There was no follow-up, no question of whether he'd be able to make it in time. No one asked if he needed help booking a flight or if he wanted to say goodbye. For a moment, Grayson stared at the screen, uncertain whether he felt grief or relief, and then guilt followed, sharp, familiar, and fast. He opened a travel app, bought the earliest ticket, requested time off, packed a single black suit. The last time he had spoken to his mother, it was 2 months ago. She had called because the hot water heater had stopped working. Grayson remembered the exact amount, $824.37. She hadn't asked how he was doing. She hadn't asked about the strange cough he'd had for 3 weeks, and she had certainly never asked whether he was happy. Still, he paid, because that's what good sons do, right? As the plane took off, Grayson watched the clouds roll by beneath him and wondered, not for the first time, if there would have been more warmth between them had he been someone else. Had he lived a different life? Had he loved the kind of person his family could speak of out loud? But those were questions with no answers now. All that remained was a funeral, a house filled with distant voices, and a role he hadn't written, but was expected to perform. He didn't cry. Not when he landed. Not when he rented a car and drove the familiar route past the diner, with the faded neon sign in the church, with the crooked bell tower. Not even when he parked in front of the house where every holiday photo was taken, except the recent ones. Because he was no longer invited. Grayson sat behind the wheel, staring at the front door. His hands trembled slightly, not from grief, but from the awareness that inside that house, no one would ask him how he'd been. They never did. Stories like this are not just about one man. They're about all of us who've ever felt like our love came with terms and conditions. If you've ever been the one who showed up even when no one asked you to, Heart Stories is here for you. Follow for more stories that feel like someone finally sees you. The funeral passed like a cold wind, formal, fast and forgettable. Grayson stood near the back of the church unnoticed. His name wasn't mentioned during the eulogy. His eyes moved between floral arrangements and folded programs, catching glimpses of people who used to know him as Gray, before that nickname felt too intimate for who he'd become in their eyes. His brother took the front row, nodding with performative grief. His sister clutched a tissue like it made her a better daughter. No one sat beside Grayson. No one even asked why. Back at the family home, after the final prayer, after the last casserole dish had been set on the table, the tone changed. The morning lifted like fog, revealing something dry and practical beneath it. The matter of property. Grayson heard his name spoken aloud for the first time that day, not in sympathy, but in calculation. He should get a third, obviously, his sister said. But maybe less since he lives in this city and won't need the house. His brother added something about reinvestment potential, and Grayson stood silently near the doorway, realizing he was not so much included in the conversation as tolerated in its vicinity. No one asked how long he was staying. No one offered him a room. The bedroom he grew up in had been turned into storage. He found a dusty air mattress in the garage and set it up in the basement where the heating didn't quite reach. That night, he ate cold leftovers from a paper plate alone on the back porch, the only place quiet enough to hear his own thoughts. He took out his phone and scrolled through photos, quiet memories of a life his family didn't know existed. A sunset in Provincetown, A snow-covered morning in Vermont. Jordan laughing in the kitchen. Flour on his nose, the dog curled under the table. Grayson had married Jordan 5 years ago. Quietly, without guests, without family. The license sat folded in a drawer at home, legal but invisible. They bought a modest house near the coast, filled it with plants and books, and built a life on the margins of the world that raised him. Jordan knew everything, every wound, every silence. Grayson never voiced aloud. He had never once asked Grayson to cut ties with his family. He simply waited patient as a stone until Grayson was ready to choose himself. But now Grayson wasn't just a quiet son, he was a legal spouse. And while the family whispered about dividing their mother's things and selling the house, they hadn't considered the truth he carried. They hadn't even noticed the gold ring on his left hand. Because they had never looked, they had always assumed he was alone, that his life was a quiet failure they could pity while still depending on his generosity. When his sister made a jab about him being married to work, Grayson didn't correct her. When his brother joked that Grayson must be rich from not having a family to feed, he simply smiled, the way someone does when they know they no longer need to explain themselves. They didn't know Jordan was waiting in the car. They didn't know he had helped Grayson pack, that he had kissed his forehead before the flight and said, "Whatever happens, come back whole." They didn't know the man they refused to acknowledge had seen Grayson cry in the shower or hold himself together in an empty airport lounge, or tremble at the sound of his mother's voicemail months before she died. They didn't know he had written a letter folded and sealed at Grayson's request, and Grayson hadn't planned to share it. Until tonight. Because tonight they were setting the table for the next day's memorial reception. They were choosing speakers, preparing a slideshow, debating whether to include certain photos. Photos where Grayson appeared too different. Photos where he had grown his hair out, smiled too wide, dressed in the colors he had once been told weren't for boys. They didn't know it yet, but Grayson wasn't coming alone tomorrow. He was bringing the truth. The memorial reception was set for noon in the same church basement where Grayson had once sat for Sunday school, wearing too tight collars and forcing himself to smile through the sermons. The walls hadn't changed, still pale yellow and faintly stained with years of potlucks and prayers, but the people inside had grown sharper, more rehearsed. His sister stood by the coffee urn directing volunteers. His brother adjusted the projector, muttering about transitions and slide timing. It was the kind of gathering meant to look like healing, but felt more like inventory. Grayson entered with Jordan by his side. He hadn't warned anyone, hadn't asked permission. Jordan wore a navy suit, simple and sharp, the kind you only wear when you've already lived through being looked at the wrong way. He walked without flinching. Even as heads turned, eyebrows lifted, and conversations stuttered. Mid-sentence, no one recognized him because no one had ever tried. No one greeted him, but no one stopped him either. He wasn't acknowledged, and that somehow was louder than anything else. Grayson walked beside him. Posture quiet but deliberate. He didn't introduce Jordan. He didn't need to. He could feel the confusion in the room. Silence simmering, searching for context. Some distant cousin leaned over and whispered, "Is that a friend from work?" Another guessed it must be a neighbor helping him through a hard time. No one dared say what they feared, that the man beside Grayson might be the answer to every question they never asked. There was a slideshow, photos set to soft piano music. Grayson as a child holding a soccer trophy. His sister blowing out candles. Their mother in her garden, smiling at nothing in particular. The photos moved through decades, but there were gaps, moments erased. His college graduation was missing. So was the picture from his first trip abroad. His mother had refused to share those online, saying once, "Some things are better kept private." Grayson knew what she meant. A rainbow flag had appeared in the background of one. Jordan's arm had been around his shoulder in another. When the slideshow ended, the pastor invited anyone to speak. His brother stood up first, telling a story about how their mother always knew when he was lying as a child. The room laughed politely. His sister followed, reading a poem she'd found online the night before. Then there was silence, not long, just enough for discomfort to settle. Then Grayson stood. He didn't clear his throat, didn't unfold any paper. He simply walked forward, Jordan's gaze steady behind him. "I won't speak long," he began. "I just want to say something my mother never said in this room, but I think she meant to." A pause. Not for effect, but because the words were heavy and he wanted to carry them with care. "For years I gave everything I could to this family. Not because I was asked, because I thought it might earn me a seat at the table, a place in the story. But the truth is I've spent most of my life being someone you could edit out. The air stiffened. No one moved. I was told not to bring drama. I was told to keep certain parts of myself off Facebook. I was never asked who I love. No one wanted to know. And that silence, it doesn't just erase you, it convinces you you're not worth remembering. He turned slightly, just enough to gesture toward the back of the room. That man standing by the wall. That's Jordan. He's my husband. We've been married 5 years. My mother knew. She never spoke about it publicly, but I believe she regretted that. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a sealed envelope. Before she passed, she left this letter in a safe deposit box. Jordan is the one she asked to deliver it, not my brother, not my sister Tim. He walked over and placed the envelope on the table next to the guest book. I'm not reading it out loud. If any of you care to know what she really thought, what she never had the courage to say when she was alive, you can read it yourself. He didn't wait for applause or understanding. There wasn't any. Grayson returned to his seat next to Jordan and took his hand. For the first time in years, he let someone see that gesture. The room stayed silent for a long time, and that silence no longer belonged to him. No one moved to open the envelope at first. It sat there on the linen-covered table like something radioactive, unlabeled, dangerous, uninvited. People whispered in corners, shifting glances between Grayson and the sealed letter, as if waiting for someone braver to go first. His brother walked past it twice each time, pretending it wasn't there. His sister stared at it for a full minute before stepping back and announcing she needed air. Jordan stayed seated beside Grayson, hand lightly resting over his. He didn't speak, didn't prompt, didn't interfere. That was something they had learned in their years together. Some truths couldn't be softened. They had to be allowed to hang in the air and settle where they may like dust after a collapse. It was the pastor of all people who eventually stepped forward. He read the name written in careful handwriting on the front, Grayson's, and then turned to him as if asking for silent permission. Grayson nodded once. The pastor unfolded the envelope with the cautious hands of someone opening a wound, and as he began reading, the room hushed. My dearest Grayson, the letter began. If this reaches you, then I'm no longer there to look you in the eye. Maybe that's why I'm finally telling the truth. There was a tremor in the pastor's voice, but he read on. I knew about Jordan. I knew about your life, even when I pretended not to. I saw the photos you never posted. I read the holiday cards you never sent. I knew you were building a home with someone who loved you. And I knew I was not brave enough to love you out loud the way I should have. A woman in the back put her hand to her mouth. Someone's phone buzzed, but no one dared move to silence it. I didn't hide you because I was ashamed of you, Grayson. I hid you because I was afraid of what it would cost me to defend you. That's a sentence no mother should write, but I've carried that weight every day. I wanted to keep you close and safe, and instead I made you feel like you were only welcome when you were silent. I'm so sorry. The words fell like slow rain on a dry field. Grayson closed his eyes, letting the ache roll through him. He had waited his entire life to hear her say it. And now that it was here, it felt like forgiveness handed to a ghost. The letter continued. If I could go back, I would invite him in. I would ask questions. I would make space, but I can't rewrite the past. What I can do is leave behind one thing that no one else gets to shape this house. It's yours, Grayson. Not as a gift, not as payment, as acknowledgement. Because while others came to me for help, you came just to check in. You called every Sunday without asking for anything. You never asked for recognition, but you deserved it more than anyone. The pastor paused. A few people looked down at their feet. Others stared at the floor tiles like the grout might somehow explain how they missed all this. There is a notarized letter in the safe deposit box transferring full ownership of the house to you. I've spoken with the lawyer. No one else can contest it. I don't care if it makes things uncomfortable. I've already wasted too much time keeping things comfortable. Live here if you want to, sell it if you must, but please know it was always meant to be yours. The pastor folded the letter, placed it gently back in the envelope, and set it down with reverence. Silence again, but this time it wasn't stunned denial. It was reckoning. His brother stood stiffly near the buffet, table eyes cast low, fists clenched but unspoken. His sister stood by the doorway, cheeks blotched red somewhere between embarrassment and shame. And all around them were the people who had watched Grayson grow up, who now realized they had never really seen him at all. Later, as the reception wound down and the chairs began to stack, a few guests came up quietly to offer small nods or faint apologies, masked as compliments. That was brave, or you're stronger than I could be. Grayson accepted them with polite stillness, neither cold nor warm. He wasn't here to mend what had never existed. As the sun began to lower behind the church, Grayson and Jordan stood outside on the steps. The autumn breeze moved through the trees, carrying the scent of dried leaves and something fading. They watched as guests filed out, some avoiding eye contact, others nodding as if just now placing him into a new category. But one woman, an older neighbor, someone who used to bake cookies for the whole street, paused in front of them. She looked at Jordan, then at Grayson. "I wish she'd told us sooner," she said. "You would have never had to sit alone all those holidays." Grayson didn't know what to say, so he just nodded. Then she reached out and gently touched Jordan's arm. "You take good care of him, you hear?" Jordan smiled. "I always have." And for the first time all day, Grayson laughed. Not bitterly, not with restraint, just a short, quiet laugh that felt like breathing again. Grayson didn't stay long after the reception. There was no point. The house no longer felt like his, mother's, and perhaps it never truly had. Not in the way he once hoped. What it held now was a silence that belonged to other people, the kind that tiptoes around truth, drapes itself in politeness, and pretends the past can be folded away like linens after a wake. He and Jordan spent the night in a hotel just outside town. A quiet room, soft lamplight, a dog-eared book between them. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. That night, Grayson lay awake, not out of grief, but because something inside him had shifted. Not healed, no, not yet, but rearranged, as if all the moments he'd once tried to hide had been taken out of storage and set gently into the open. Not judged, just seen. The next morning, Grayson walked alone through the neighborhood he used to deliver newspapers in. The fences had been repainted. The corner store was now a smoothie place. Even the church had a new roof. But the people, some of them were still the same, and he realized he didn't owe them anything. Not clarity, not conversation, not even bitterness. When he returned to the house, Jordan was already packing the final box. They weren't staying. The decision was mutual and silent. The home his mother left him was just a building now. Not a promise, not a prize, just evidence that even in silence, love had tried to speak. Grayson decided to sell it. Not out of spite, but as a way to close a chapter she was too afraid to end. He left one thing behind, an envelope on the kitchen counter. Inside, he placed a copy of the letter and a short note in his own handwriting. "If you ever want to know who I really am, start here. If not, that's okay too." No name, no guilt, just choice. A week later, they were back in Boston. The air felt lighter. The house they returned to wasn't bigger, but it was real. It had framed pictures of them in the hallway, and coats hanging side by side. A dog bowl with a name they chose together. This was a home built not from inheritance, but intention. Grayson stood in the kitchen one evening, stirring pasta, when Jordan walked in holding a thin envelope, forwarded from his sister. No note attached. Inside was a photo creased at the edges from their childhood. The three siblings sitting on the front steps, legs tangled, sun in their eyes. Grayson was in the middle, smiling but not quite fully. On the back, someone had written, "Next time send one with all four of you." It wasn't an apology, it wasn't enough, but it was something. That night, Grayson printed a new photo. One of him and Jordan, taken last summer, sitting on a park bench with their arms linked, laughing at nothing in particular. He placed it beside the childhood photo, not to erase the past, but to let it coexist. Because truth didn't need to shout to be permanent. It just needed to be placed where no one could hide it anymore. And for the first time, he didn't feel like a secret kept behind locked doors or a favor to be repaid. He felt like a man who had lived a full life, even if most of his family only knew the outline. He didn't want revenge. He didn't need a confrontation. He just wanted to live without folding himself in half, to fit into someone else's version of love. And now finally he was. Have you ever felt like the version of you your family accepts isn't the whole truth? What would it mean to live without trimming the edges of who you are, just to fit in a frame someone else picked out for you? If this story spoke to you, follow Heart Stories. Because somewhere someone is finally telling your story the way it deserves to be told.